All right, thank you for being here today. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us what community you live in?
Sure. My name's Kyle Laskow. I live in Madison Grove. We've lived in Providence for the last year, going on a year and a half now. I live with my wife, and I have two young daughters, Chloe and Calla.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kyle. Describe why you'd like to be on the board of directors for the Master Homeowners Association.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a perfect opportunity with the community being handed over from the builder kind of over to the community itself to really set the direction for where Providence is looking to go kind of in its next phase. There's a lot of projects and things that are kind of in the works with the parks and a lot of things that go on within the community that are kind of just getting kicked off, and I think it kind of gives the people on the board the chance to kind of provide some leadership and maybe set the tone for where the community is going to go maybe in the next 2 or 5 years.
Thank you. What do you see as a priority for the incoming board?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. I think, first of all, being that this is the first opportunity for the people that live here to really govern themselves, I think the first thing that's important is to figure out, what do the people want to do? I mean, I can give some examples of what I might think are good things or good directions for the community to go. But I mean, I think it's important for at least some opportunity to people to kind of give their input as well. And I think the people on the board should really take that into consideration and let that drive, what decisions they're going to make and figure out what's important for the people and then kind of incorporate, let's say, my own views into that and, provide that kind of leadership and making sure we take everything into consideration that the people out there want to do.
Great, thank you. Describe your skills and experience that would be of benefit to the overall success of the Master Association.
Right. Well, I'm not someone that's served on HOA boards, and I'm not someone that's been involved in kind of community government in any way. So I would say I'm a little bit more of an outsider candidate. I would probably want to focus on draw on some of more of my business skills and leadership. I work for a software company, and in that type of environment, things are very goal driven or very results driven. And it's important that when you're working with committees or when you're working with groups of people or perhaps people that have opposing views, that you can define what those goals are and figure out ways to reach them. So, I would like to bring some of that kind of business background to an HOA group. I just feel that there's a lot of experience, working in private business that maybe could be of benefit to an HOA board or to really getting a community going, especially in these earlier stages. A lot of work that I do and a lot of work in software is really driven around specific projects. So people very much coordinate around a specific project. You outline exactly what that project's going to look like. You get people involved, maybe outside of your small group, who are going to help you achieve those particular goals and get to, a completion of that project. So, I think some of those skills I think would be useful to an HOA board. Now I do understand there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of ways that things are done that are kind of set, whether it's by law or whether it's set by the community, that kind of still have to be followed. But I think within that framework, there's a lot of opportunity to bring a more goals-oriented or results-driven perspective to different community projects that you're trying to complete.
Excellent, thank you. Tell us a little bit about what your long and short-term visions are for the Master Association.
Right, and it kind of goes back to a little bit about why I wanted to serve on the board. I mean, I think the first thing that the board needs to do is just determine what does the community really want to do. Where do we really want to go? This is our first chance to take a look at things kind of from our perspective. What's been going well the last 5 years? I would say a lot of things. I just moved up here a year ago, and my wife and I made a very conscious decision that this was a great community to move into. It was a young community, a lot of young families, and a lot of community spirit. So we chose this community for those reasons. So there's a lot of very positive things up here. But I think now there's really a lot of room to grow. And I think there's a lot of people out there in the community that have a lot of good ideas. So I think kind of hearing out what those ideas are and getting an understanding of where the people do want to go is probably the first thing I think any board should do, whether it's with me or without me. After that, I think setting up some goals on how to get there. So you've decided, okay, this is what we want to do as a community. That's great. How do you get there? That's kind of the hard part. It's a good idea to get feedback from everyone and then decide what feedback is best and set that up as what you're going to do. But then I think you need to lay out a pretty clear plan on how do you expect to get there. There's limited amount of time in everybody's lives. There's limited amount of money to spend on things. And then there's competing interests. Someone wants to do this with $100,000. Somebody wants to do something else with $100,000. You're not going to be able to do everything. So you're going to have to focus on which projects then take a priority and lay out a plan to kind of accomplish those goals. So that's kind of short term, really, establishing what you want to do and then figuring out the plan to get there. And those plans could take 3 weeks. Some of these things, could probably be done in a short amount of time. Others are going to stretch into more, a long-term goal for the community. What is a long-term goal then? So you're looking at, the parks for me. I would list that as something, and I think there's a general feeling out there that, especially with the Huckleberry Park, while it's a nice start and it kind of, it's better than not having a park at all, there are certainly things that in phase one could have been done differently, but I think some of that is now behind us. So I think looking at that park and figuring out how to make it better is kind of one long-term goal. But on top of that, and probably more importantly, is there's a whole phase two to the park that needs to get completed. And there's funding that needs to get done with that. And you can work with the city to get some additional funding with that. And working with, Chris and Catherine and the group here to figure out what's the best way to make that a community-friendly family park. So that's probably a number one concern. That Huckleberry Park and what goes into phase two of that park. I think people in general have crime on their minds, and in any community, that's something you want to have a safe community. I've got 2 young kids, so obviously it's a concern. And I'm not just talking about, more advanced crime or break-ins or things, but people have general concerns about speeding and people driving too fast through the community. So, mischievous kids, or there's been a lot of talk about people riding mopeds through the community and up and down, walkways and things like that. So it's not just big picture dangerous crime, but it's also some of the lower level nuisance crime that goes on in the community. And what is the best way to kind of deal with that long term and just make it a little bit more of a family friendly community. So the parks would be one item, crime would be another, and I think something that Providence really does a very good job of is the kind of building of the community spirit, from like the Harvest Fest that just went on to the 4th of July fireworks, which is kind of getting a revision now to make it a little bit more of an intimate Providence event. There's a lot of the food truck events that were moved from the corner of Hualapai over here and now going on at Huckleberry Park. I think there's a basis for a lot of very good community type events. And I think all of those could be built on a little bit. A lot of these were kind of the first event that occurred for each one, which is great. So it's not something that you need to reinvent the wheel with it. It's something that's already there, already in place, and I think the board can really work with people on those committees or people from the association here that are involved in it to build on it. What was done right in the first phase? What did people like most? Okay, but let's revisit it for year 2 and year 3 and make sure that it's always being built on and not kind of settling that, year 1 was great, let's just, leave it at that. I think there should always be a goal of trying to make it better the next year and the next year and the next year. And I think, that's really important, especially in Las Vegas, because a general Las Vegas complaint is that there is a little bit of a lack of community, valley-wide. I don't know if anybody has an answer for how to solve that problem. There's people that live in Vegas from many different parts of the country, and it's not like a terrible problem. It would just be nicer if there were more communities that had that sense of community. So I think focusing on that is probably item 3 that I'd really have as an important goal, and doing what we can to strengthen that.
Great. Thank you so much. That kind of actually leads into our next one, which you kind of touched on a little bit. But would like to share with us, please, some of the strengths and weaknesses related to the board position in regard to the following. The first one would be leadership.
Okay. I think, again, going back to, I'm not someone who's served on boards, who's had a lot of experience serving on boards. So I'm not running as someone who's going to, have that insider knowledge and working knowledge of how a board's going to work. And I don't pretend to, and I'm not even sure in all cases that's a benefit to have that. I think Providence, in a little way, because we're moving away from some of the things that the builder's done, there is a bit of a look for a fresh start with just the direction of the board. So I'm certainly, I think, someone that can bring that kind of leadership more from a business perspective. I've been working in software for the last 15 years, leading a lot of teams, directing a lot of different organizations, and in some ways, I think that working in a software type industry, like I said before, there's very goal-driven projects that force you to stay focused on things, and there's not much, things have to work right, or people are held accountable if they aren't. So, I would like to think that I could bring some of that mentality and some of that drive to make sure that, if we commit to do things as a board, or if we make promises to the community that X, Y, and Z is going to get done, then we should work together, and it should be a letdown if the community is not given what we've promised to deliver. So I would like to try to bring that perspective to the board.
Okay, thank you. Same question again. Share with us some strengths and weaknesses related to the board position in regards to financial understanding. My current role, I certainly manage large payrolls, and there's again, going back to working with different projects or working with different things in business, everything is under some kind of budgetary constraint. So, if things are put in place and there's a certain budget that something needs to get done under, it's definitely something that I have experienced kind of meeting those parameters and making sure that things that are done within those kinds of budgets. As far as overall managing of master community budgets, again, being a little bit of an outsider with this process, it's not something that I would run on as a top strength in managing that type of budget. But again, I think what I'm proposing for myself, at least, is to be someone that's having a little bit more focus on the projects and focus on just bigger picture things that are going on within the community. Perfect, thank you. Again, share with us some of your strengths and weaknesses related to the board position in regard to architectural guidelines and design review.
Right. I think I think it's very important for an HOA community to have these sets of guidelines and to make sure that people throughout the different neighborhoods adhere to those guidelines. Mm-hmm. I think it's slightly more important at the community level that people, really the board and then any of the groups that are working with the board, to make sure that the community has a very good sense of what they want to do as far as like the aesthetics of the community, and make sure that it's always taken into consideration, no matter which project you're working on. You're working on new parks, it should all mesh kind of with the rest of the community. So I think that
it is very important to always keep that in mind and always trying to kind of push it a little bit more. So we've got guidelines now that advise this is how new signs should look within the community, or if we're going to do some enhancements to some of the streets. I mean, I think that's fine, but I think we should always be pushing it a little to something a little bit more higher end, or something a little bit, can we do this a little bit better or a little bit nicer? It doesn't always need to be more expensive to do something like that, but someone should always be mindful of the fact that, you know, the major common areas of this community impact home values or how people feel when they drive through the community, when they're looking at houses. And I think that's something the board definitely has to keep in mind, that, you know, the aesthetics of the main parts of the community really speak a lot to people when they're driving through. And I think, you know, just for us living here in general, it's nice to drive up and down, you know, some of the streets here that are very nice tree-lined streets. And, you know, generally speaking, Providence is a very nice community. But I mean, I think everything can be pushed and done a little bit better. So I think my focus on that would be more towards the community aspect and what can be done in the community areas. I'm not sure, I would probably fall on more of the liberal side of things with, you know, maybe, you know, what are you doing in your own house? Again, people need to conform to certain standards, but I'm not one that's going to be typically probably the more conservative person. I won't be one of the more conservative people with, you know, policing of individual residences. But I think it's the community in general and the look there that would concern me more.
Perfect, thank you. We did talk about this a little bit earlier, but again, share with us some strengths and weaknesses related to the board position in regard to our social lifestyle and the culture of Providence.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that, like I said, there's a lot of good events that are going on already. And I think the main reason I would want to be involved more in that is because I have 2 young kids. So to me, it's a very personal item. And, you know, having this Harvest Fest and kids coming out and doing trick-or-treating, or, you know, getting your face painted or doing a caricature or whatever events go on. I mean, to me, that's something, I'm really doing it for myself and my kids at that point. And, you know, I think sometimes some of those more selfish reasons for doing something would certainly benefit the entire community. So, you know, I think my family moved up here because of that sense of community, or maybe more of the idea of the sense of the community. I'm not sure we knew the specifics of what Providence really was when we decided to move here in September of last year, but I think it was more the idea of that sense of community. And, you know, it's certainly there, and, you know, I think it's something that, for my kids' sake and for the sake of the community, I think that I would certainly like to promote and you know, have more people take part in some of these things. I can add to that too, you know, I'm from the Midwest, so my wife's from Wisconsin, I'm from Ohio, and I think there is a lot more like community togetherness back in some Midwestern communities. Not a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just, you know, it's something that's there. And I think Providence is striving for some of that a little bit more than maybe other Vegas communities are trying to do. And I think that's a very positive thing. So I think that's something that can really make this community stand out more than others here in Vegas.
Great. Almost there. Briefly describe one aspect of the Master Association's programs that you would do differently, and tell us why.
When you say the Master Association programs, what are you referring to specifically? Like,
I mean, a little bit of everything. I mean,
maybe any of the guidelines, any of the events.
kind of like what we just talked about.
Right. So I mean, I think,
Structure.
I think with, again, being an outsider. So, you know, I've been attending the board meetings since we moved to Providence last year. So one of the things for me that I find a little bit difficult to follow is, you know, you go to the board meetings and it's really the main place where you get feedback on what's going on for the community. But it does, for me, lack a little bit of detail, and it does lack a little bit of maybe what goes on behind the scenes in order to arrive at some of the decisions. I do understand that there's structure in place that everyone has to follow in order to make those board meetings run as they're supposed to. That said, I would like to think that there's a way to incorporate a little bit more, I don't want to call it transparency, because if you say transparency, then it seems like people aren't being transparent about something. But a way to provide at least a little bit more of the behind the scenes thought process, or to lay out why a certain decision is first in front of everyone, and then explain through what was taken into consideration to then arrive at some final decision about why a decision was made about the community. I just feel there could be a little bit more of an explanation to people, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in a board meeting type setting, but can things be explained more, via some of the emails that get sent out? Or can the board have more communication with people via social media? Or can there be newsletters that include some additional board topics? And I suspect that there probably are out there already. It just, to me, doesn't seem as easy to find as just a standard homeowner, and it sometimes is hard to follow. Even coming to each meeting, it's sometimes hard to follow what was talked about in September is now kind of working its way through in January, and here we are in June making a decision. It's hard to put it all together as a homeowner, not having kind of the backstory to things. So I would like to make all of that a little bit more clear, and I think that goes back to some of the short and long-term vision of setting some of those goals and laying them out. And I'm a believer in setting goals, whether they're large, big picture goals for the community or smaller goals, and then just have some way to lay that out so people that can then follow to say, okay, when this new board met in January of 2016, they laid out 17 goals or 17 things that they want to do. So that when people come back in January of 17, they can look back and say, okay, you guys laid out and said you were going to do 17 things this year. How did you do? And I think that's a fair way to then grade, how well is somebody doing at something, or how poorly is someone doing at something. I'm not sure if there's a mechanism now to kind of grade how a particular board or a particular organization is doing. I'd like to put something like that in place so that people understand what's being worked on and what kind of success we're having at doing it.
Thank you. All right, the last question. In the last minute, do you have anything additional that you'd like to add?
Only to reiterate from where I started with this is my wife and I, we moved here about a year and a half ago, very much liking the idea of Providence and as a community and all of the community aspects that it kind of brought to Las Vegas, and that's what we really bought into. And we've got 2 young kids. A 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. So they're really young children, and we're looking for that kind of place where we can really enjoy and have them really love growing up in. So it is, I'm doing this more because I'm a bit